man's world. I have turned the soul.
Hello, Fake It fam. Welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Anna is a co-founder and lead engineer for Lioness, a smart sex toy that I found is dubbed as a Fitbit for your vagina.
Fitbit loves that.
Yeah, so Anna, thank you so much for coming onto the Fake It podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited. This is going to be really fun.
Yeah, so Anna, you went to Berkeley and you majored in mechanical engineering, and then you went to Amazon and you worked on a team with 16 other engineers that are all men, right? And I read online that you say that mechanical engineering is a superpower that helps you build things for people like yourself. Do you want to explain how you went from working on Amazon to kind of going into the female sex toy industry?
Yeah. So I would say I never meant to be in the sex toy industry at all. I grew up really scared of my own body. I grew up in a really religious, conservative family, in Korea. We never talked about sex, but it was one of those things, I always knew that I loved building things, the concept of want to build something and then being able to create it. So when I studied mechanical engineering, I really pursued this American dream. My parents moved from Korea to America to give us better opportunities.
Right.
And then we moved to America and I was like, I'm going to work in corporate America. I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. So I was at Amazon and then I was on a team with 16 guys. And I remember we were building concepts out and they're like, oh, we're building all these unisex products. And then one of the products they were working on as a concept was a watch. And then I remember being they made the prototype and I was walking to their desk and I picked it up and I put it on my wrist and I was like, a woman wouldn't wear this. I was like, the face of the watch is bigger than my wrist.
Crazy.
Yeah. And it was one of those things you can just see them processing, realizing that they've never tried it on a woman.
Wow.
Or that they never designed it around that.
Yeah.
Even though they call it a unisex product.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that was the first time I realized products aren't usually made with women in mind. And I think especially when we don't have women in STEM, we don't have that opportunity to build with intention of who is this going to be for and all of that. And then very luckily, right around that time, I met a founder of a different sex toy company. Yeah. Doesn't exist anymore. So I can roast it all I want.
Of course.
But it was this guy and he was the founder. And I was like, how do you know what you're building works for people with vulvas? And he was like, there is an industry standard where you put the vibration in your nose and that's what a clitoris feels like.
What?
And
That's crazy.
Yeah, but if you go to sex toy conventions to this day, you'll still see a lot of times they'll put it on their nose.
I'm so tempted to get my sex toy that I keep in my backpack.
And then now you're
on my nose to see if it compares.
Yeah.
I usually put it on my finger.
So finger is close because the finger has 10, I think it has about 10 or it has 18,000 nerves.
Okay.
And then the clitoris has about 10,000. Okay. So I think that's a better relation, but still it's just such a different.
That's weird. That doesn't make any sense. Your face would just be vibrating.
I know.
That's crazy.
And then they're always oh, if it doesn't feel good on your nose, it's not going to be the product for you, which I always just never understood where that connection came from.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And so that was just how we started to decide. I was like, oh, I want to build a better vibrator.
Yeah.
And then as we started looking at what a better vibrator will look like, we just realized there's no research in female sexual function. And so I was like, you can't even build one because there's no data points. And so that's how everything kind of came together. And I was like, I'm going to do it for 1 year. I'm going to go back to my regular day job. Yeah. And then here we are 6 years later, I'm still doing it. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
And I think what you said about the unisex being kind of made for men for the most part, there's so much body of research that shows how the airbag in a car, for example, has been disproportionately killing more women than men because of the height difference between men and women and how it's made for men more, how it's been the dummies practiced with it have been male sized people. Yes. And so there's so much examples of this, and I think it's really cool that you decide to challenge that and create something that's actually for women in itself. And do you want to talk a little bit about the orgasm research and what that world looks like too?
Yeah. So I would say what we're measuring right now is involuntary pelvic floor contraction. So how the vagina or anal muscles are squeezing and relaxing. Yeah. So it's one of the best indicators for arousal and orgasms. Yeah. It's what's been used in research through the decades. The most notable one being by Bolin back in the 1980s. Yeah. And so that's kind of what we're measuring measuring, and we know that it's kind of, in the way we say it's a Fitbit for your vagina is that you'll see differences the more you use it of like different factors, like how alcohol can change it, stress, lack of sleep, medication, like all of these things. And so what we're really trying to do is build out this database of like, well, what does change it? What health implications can there be when you see orgasm data? And so that's been really cool. So we just published a paper in the Journal of Sexual Medicine.
That's awesome.
And it's all about orgasm patterns. So orgasms, like there's a unique pattern that happens during an orgasm. So we've kind of categorized into 3 types: ocean wave, which is like really rhythmic, squeeze and relax. Avalanche starts really high and then it goes down in force, but it's still the squeeze and relax motion. And then the volcano is like, it's like flat and then a huge explosion of force and a huge explosion down. And so we've seen that everyone with a vagina has a unique identifying pattern of an orgasm.
Right. And within these 3 categories.
So far within these 3 categories, I would say like a lot of people are like, no, I swear mine's different. Or I swear I've felt all of them. But so far what we've seen in our data set is that we've seen only one person be one data point and then not jump from one to another. So I always tell people like, trust me, I would love to be proven wrong. Like that's the beauty of science and like continue to expand the research. But so far we just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and it's actually funny because I went to your talk at Stanford and that's how we got connected. And the next orgasm that I had after our conversation.
Did you think about it?
I did. I literally did. I was like, after I orgasmed, I was like, which one does, because I wasn't using the Lioness. And so I was like, which category does this orgasm fall into? I remember thinking that and thinking that it doesn't fall into any. Because so now I need to test it. I'm going back to New York and I have the Lioness. I bought it like literally I said like 2 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna do it with the Lioness and see. now
and then
which
if you feel comfortable, screenshot the data and be like, which one is this? I feel like a psychic. Like sometimes people send me their data all the time, and I'm like, this is what I think, and I'm like I feel like a psychic reader sometimes.
It's like you're reading like hand like palms, but like really it's just like orgasm
like,
lines.
this is what I think about your orgasm. Like this is a really interesting one. Yeah, it's super funny. So I'm excited to see it.
No, that's really awesome. So what has like before you've actually contributed to all this body of research when it comes to orgasms for women, what has a body of research looked like up until now?
Ooh, I would say there are amazing people in this space that do research. And so there's, especially the Kinsey Institute tries to put out as many sexual health data, especially survey-based ones, as much as possible. And we have people like Bolin and Herbenik, like all these people that have done different studies. So it's gone wide range of things like MRI brain scans during an orgasm. And so they've actually done that on people that are paralyzed from the waist down to be like, hey, even if you're not able to feel sexual stimulation on your genitalia, do you still have an orgasm that's lit up in a brain somehow?
Interesting.
So they've done really cool studies over the years. I recently learned that they do a lot on animals.
Okay.
Because I learned apparently animals have clitorises, which I think makes sense to me. But then it's just like a weird thing to think about of being like, oh, I can't. Like imagining a cow has a clitoris is like such an odd.
It's so interesting. Does it get rubbed when like the cow's being penetrated?
I don't know. See, that's like things that I want to ask the farmer. Maybe your next interview should be asking farmers about their animals.
I guess so. I don't know if I want to do that.
So it's like a whole.
Just like I don't know if I want to have that conversation, but we're having it right now. So
yes, because I've read because it goes into things of like the theory of like why female orgasms exist, right? Because there's no real answer as to, we don't exactly know why. But they do have hypothesis.
So crazy.
Yeah, it is. But they have a hypothesis that like animals like cats and rabbits, they need to be stimulated in order for an egg to ovulate. And so to me, then it makes sense of like, oh, well, then the clitoris is like a pleasure point. So when it's activated, maybe genetically passed, like back then it used to help you ovulate or whatever the case may be. But it's hard to say. But yeah, so there's all kinds of research that have been done. I would just say the hard thing about it is that it's usually extremely limited. Like one of the most cited papers to this day is the Bolin paper in 1980s. And that was done on 11 women. So the sample size is incredibly small. And so even our abstract where we wrote in the Journal of Sexual Medicine that we had 56 participants, people were like, how can you base it on 56 people? But it's like, this is one of the biggest studies, which is a little sad, I agree, but it's hard to do these kinds of studies and then
Why is it hard to do these kinds of studies?
Ooh, there's a lot of things. I would say the ultimate thing is that there's such a stigma around female sexual function.
Right.
So even when we look at female health, it's an incredibly ignored space.
Yeah.
And then when we look at sexual health, like it's such a taboo if it's not anything to do with particularly like ovulating, fertility, pregnancy. And so when we talk about pleasure, it's such a stigmatized thing of like, well, it doesn't matter. There's no sexual function. There's no procreation kind of aspect to it.
Right.
And then, so there's very little funding that happens. So I would say even to this day, we have so many researchers who are interested in doing studies around sexual function, but they don't have the funding to do it. And so there's this big gap of like, we're leaving more than half the population of the world kind of clueless about pleasure, you know? And we're like sexual function, why your body is the way it is.
Right.
And even like the anatomy of it, right? So it's really interesting to kind of see how much the stigma and taboo has held us back. And then, but I think about it even for me as a kid, like growing up in a really like conservative family, just realizing, it's super hard conversation to have.
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, like I grew up in a very religious family too, but my mother, she is the most outspoken sexual person that I know.
Yeah.
And so like she gave me a vibrator and kind of opened up the conversation topic for me. And I've been that person for a lot of my friends too.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Like I frequently have conversations where they just kind of sit down with me at lunch and tell me about like what's wrong with their relationship sexually. And I'm like, how about you try having a sex night? Yeah. Where like, you know, you buy games and like
do some fun things.
Yeah. And like, it's just so crazy how they feel uncomfortable to talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah. Did you ever, I'm like curious, like when your mom and you had like this first like sex talk or like buying the vibrator, was it scary or like you were like scared of the conversation or?
Yeah. I mean, like I was totally scared and uncomfortable for the most part. I would say that like she's normalized just my body to an extent where when I was 14 and I got my period, I remember like running around my house telling like my brother and my dad, I get my period, I'm a woman, you know, like,
like I did it.
Yeah. And so like that already just a part of our body was normalized in my family. And then my mom, she got me this like giant like rabbit vibrator. It was huge. And she's like, this is one that I like. And then she's like, my favorite setting is like when you go to the 4th level.
That's amazing.
So like is a lot, you know, like
that makes me so happy because I think it creates the next generations of people that are so comfortable or like open about their body. Because I always even think about it like now a lot of my friends are having kids and then they're like, you're gonna give them the sex talk, right? And I'm like, all of a sudden now it's like people that I know, I'm like, I'm a little nervous, but I'm like, I have to be that person for the next generation to be like, everyone needs to be comfortable with their body. Like everyone needs to protect and like feel comfortable at all times and safe in your body. So but that's amazing.
So how about you? How did you get comfortable? Because I know like you also came from like this like Korean immigrant family.
Yeah.
How did you get comfortable with the space?
Ooh, so I would say actually when we started the company, like I didn't really even own a vibrator before.
Yeah.
And I came in very much in the aspect, my co-founders will make fun of me to this day, that I was like, I don't want to be the face of the company. I don't want to have to do any interviews. I don't ever want to have to talk about my own body, orgasms, say the word clitoris. Like I was like, I'm not doing it. Yeah. And so I was like, I'm here to be a really good engineer. And I was like, I just don't want that taken away. I think when I first started, I didn't want that taken away from me, that I thought that it would invalidate me as a good engineer if I was doing something in the sex realm. Yeah. And then, so I was really nervous about kind of getting to the space. And so I always tell people like, this is me in my 6-year journey of like getting comfortable with my body. And for me, it really started with like just learning about the science behind it and just being like, oh, it's like, you know, it's a sexual function. This is just how your body reacts. Yeah. So that really helped just getting the education base and having the knowledge and terms to say the things that I wanted to say. And then genuinely like getting the data made me so curious about my own body that I was like, oh, I'm going to try it with like, what if I drink 2 cups of coffee? Or like, you start getting really curious. And so it really took me that time to just be curious about my own body. Yeah. And it didn't really specifically have to do with like bringing partners into it. And that's why I'm always like, I think masturbating really helps you just understand your body from your perspective versus like with another person.
Yeah. What do you think about like women who don't want to masturbate?
I would say like, so I get the question a lot of like, if I've never had an orgasm or I'm not sure, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't feel comfortable, where do I start? Yeah. And as much as I want to be my own really good salesperson, being like, buy a vibrator. But honestly,
you can do that. That's fine. Buy a Lioness vibrator, everyone. It's a good vibrator. I like it.
Thank you. But I would say it really starts from how do you find yourself feeling safe and comfortable in your own body?
Totally.
And I always say like remove even genitalia out of the equation of like, is it taking a bath? Like, does that make you feel comfortable? Like, what makes you feel kind of in touch with your own body?
Yeah.
And so I always tell people like, whether it's, some people find it through meditation, some people find it through a sport or like whatever the case is, like, I would love for people to just feel comfortable in their own body first. Totally. And it is steps like, well, have you ever seen what your vulva looks like in the mirror? Or like, do you know all the parts? Like, can you point out like where the urethra, like all these things are? Right. And so I always say like, that's, I think the first steps is like feeling comfortable with your body, getting to know your body before you even have to touch genitalia or anything. But
I think that's great. And also we spend, as a woman especially, we spend so much time thinking about how our body looks and how it's perceived. Yeah. And even in sex, how we sound, and how we act. Yeah. And we don't spend any time and think about how we feel in our own body. And how it feels to touch our arms and our legs and our thighs and just how we feel in our skin and like what that pleasure or the sensation is actually like. Yeah. We have no conversation about that. We spend no time really thinking about that. And so I think like what you do is also promoting that idea as well. Yeah.
And I had, I remember when we first were interviewing different women about like their sex experience, like what was like the challenging part. Yeah. And the story that carried every time was that a lot of people feel like they learn sex through that lens of another person because they had sex for the first time. This person kind of guided the experience, or like, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it's supposed to sound like, feel like. Yeah. And then, so I realized like, that's true. Like I felt that way too of like my first partner. I like wasn't in the moment or feeling about like how I wanted to experience it because I was so self-conscious of like, what is this lighting good? Like, like
my stomach.
Yeah. My stomach. Is it like too, like all these things. So I'm always like, I think masturbating, aside from being like, it's super fun, everyone should do it, but like, it's good to learn about your body just away from all the external factors.
Especially in the idea of just being alone with yourself, there's not that pressure of like somebody looking at you and that you have to perform in any aspect.
Like, hurry up.
Exactly. Exactly. That's actually a big stressor, I think, especially for women, the time it takes to orgasm. Yes. So I think you don't have that problem.
Weirdly. But I think, but also the funny thing is now that I've been putting my orgasm data out into the world.
People don't know, so it's like a minute and like 20 seconds. Okay, you're gonna get there. Okay.
I'll tell you the funny story behind it, because we used to try to get as much data when we were prototyping our products. Right. And so in our team, the people that were willing to participate were like, hey, you just need to use the Lioness as much as possible because we just need that data. So we had a Candyland. We had a Candyland board printed out, and then every day you come in, and then if you had like collected data, you like put stickers. So it's like whoever gets to the funny. And this is all willing participants. Like, and so at the end goal, like whoever got there first got like a gift card or something. And then I remember I would come in and I would like put 3 stickers, and then people would be like, in 24 hours, like, how do you have that time? And then I was like, well, each one's like a minute and a half. I was like, it's pretty fast. Yeah. And then I remember everyone being like, what? And so that was the first time I was like, oh, like that's not, because I don't know where I learned it. Maybe it's like as a kid, I was like, you need to masturbate fast because your parents might come home. Like, I don't know, like the fear of like having to hurry up. Right. But now it's funny because the whole world has access to like my orgasm data because I like post it publicly. Yeah. That's so funny. But it makes it funny for like partners. Sometimes they're like, doing something wrong? Like, why is this taking so long? And so it definitely has to like bring in conversations and things like that. I mean, like, it's different. Like, I know exactly what I want. Like, but it's not always at the angle. Yeah, I have to be like, preface everything now.
That's so, I mean, like, I get that too because of this podcast. I talk about sex in my sex life all the time too. So people, like, I said once on my podcast, and I need 10 minutes of cuddling after I have sex with somebody just because, like, to make myself feel better. Yeah. And I hooked up with somebody, and then they said to me, they're like, you want your 10 minutes?
And then you're like, yeah.
I literally was like, yes, I do want my 10 minutes.
That's kind of amazing, actually. That's actually not a bad idea. I'm going to start putting out things that I want out there.
Exactly. So, like, it's weird, but also it's like, they know. You don't have to ask for the 10 minutes. It's like, I actually do want the 10 minutes.
I've been putting out there lately. I'm like, I always joke like I'm like pillow princess because then that way I was like, then it just sets everyone's expectations so low.
That's smart. Maybe I should start doing that too. Yeah, I should start like setting very low expectations about like what I want.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say pillow princess, but I'm not a pillow princess.
I'm a little bit.
A little bit. That's fine.
Lazy.
That's fine. That's really funny. Okay, so I have 2 more questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I was wondering, so the research that you've done in terms of orgasms has been really revolutionary. What are some of the discoveries that you've had through this research that you've collected?
Yeah, so I would say the orgasm pattern one was a really big one.
Yeah.
There's some research that they're doing on like biofeedback data in general. Like, does biofeedback data actually help people understand their bodies better?
Yeah.
Because we know it in terms of like health trackers, sleep trackers. And then now it's like, well, if you have sexual function data, is it helpful for you as a person? And then actually we had a really cool one that I talk about a lot is we had a case study. We have an athlete who's been a long time user.
Yeah.
And she has like this really cool like volcano orgasm data. So like has a huge spike. And then one day she like reached out to us and was like, hey, I think my vibrator's broken. Can you like take a look? And so we were like looking at the hardware, the firmware, the software, and we are like, we can't find anything wrong. And then so she sent us like her data sets. And then we were like, hey, did something happen on this day? Because that's when your data started looking kind of like flatlined. And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, I had a sports injury. She's like, I had a concussion. And I remember all of us being like, oh my gosh, I think this is like related to a concussion. It's a physiological response.
Right.
And it was really amazing because it was the time that she took a pause from she decided to take a pause from her sport and go back to her doctors and be like, hey, I don't think this is a minor concussion. I don't want this to affect the rest of my like overall health. And so as she got physical therapy over the months, like you see her data come back to normal.
Yeah.
And so that was something we presented at a medical conference of like, hey, like, you know, traumatic brain injuries can have a huge effect and vice versa. Like orgasms can be an indicator of overall health functions for women and people with vaginas.
Wow.
And so like giving that opportunity of like, hey, there could be something. Cause you know, imagine if you had a huge concussion and then you're already dealing with this, like, you know, this whole thing where you're having a difficult time, but then all of a sudden now you're like not feeling as sexual as usual, or your orgasms don't feel as like correct, but you won't ever be like connect the 2 dots. Like now it's just an added stressor. So to us, it's amazing to be like, what if you were able to go to your doctor, pelvic floor therapist, or your sex therapist, and they can be like, hey, you know, there's actually research on how traumatic brain injuries can have an effect on that. And so giving those people those opportunities, I think is just such a cool way to just help you feel normal about your own body.
Totally. No, I think the fact that you're doing any research for women is already revolutionary.
Oh, thank you.
No, really. I mean, like if you look at the numbers, it's crazy how I think it was like 80% of like rodents that are used in research are men. And do you want to speak a little bit about just like the science of research when it associates with gender?
Yes. So when we look at sexual function, we already know there's a huge disparity. It's a quote is sometimes like every 8 papers are about male sexual function. There's 1 paper on female sexual function. And it's usually about fertility. Yeah. And then if we even just like...
So somewhat relates to a man.
So like it's baby, like it's this whole idea of like that we're here to like produce babies but not have sexual pleasure.
Right.
And then if we go even further from that, like just women's health in general, for decades, we've been using only male rodents or male animals for testing. So especially in clinical drug trials, like there's like been studies where they look at many papers and most of them only use male animals. Yeah. And it's a lot of times because female animals have like hormone cycles that they have to track. Right. It makes it adds complexity and cost to the study. So a lot of times they will not do it.
I can't believe that's okay. Like that's accepted.
I'm surprised no one's been like, well, that's silly. Yeah. And then, so I always tell the story of, so a lot of times they'll only use male mice for drug trials. Yeah. And so Ambien, the sleeping drug, the sleep aid drug. Yeah. When it first released, they had only tested on male mice. Crazy. And so as it was getting prescribed, a lot of women were coming in being like, I'm falling asleep in the day. Like all of a sudden I like pass out. I'm hallucinating. I'm sleepwalking. And then finally, after all of these complaints, they relook at it and then they're like, oh, we didn't do any tests on female mice. And the way that women metabolize Ambien, that dosage was considered an overdose. Wow. So they were overdosing all these women with Ambien. And it took the FDA, I think like over 10 years for them to enforce them to go back and be like, redo the study. And so, so now there's a different dosage depending on what, like if you're a cis woman or a cis man. And then, but before it was just like, oh, like here's the drug. And so now it's become a thing where you have to do both animals.
Got it. That's good.
But it's like, that means like hundreds of years of data or like research is all not for us.
Right. Yeah. And we do use old data a lot of the times, like for like, you know, food, like the Ansel Keys study, you know what I'm talking about, with like the metabolism and calorie deficiency. And like we cite that all the time when it comes to just like understanding eating disorders and all these things. And it was all men in that study too. And like, it's really crazy. It
is. And it's sad that a lot of times I learn things through TikTok first. And then I like start doing the research and I'm like, how come it takes like us now as a generation to like look back at things and be like, that's not okay.
Right. Yeah. Right. I recently did a podcast episode with somebody who founded a birth control like delivery company and just doing research on birth control. I've been learning so much about how our brains are affected by birth control, you know, and how like the people we find attractive is affected, our sex drive is affected, and our cortisol levels are affected. It's good to know these things. And it's crazy how we didn't. And I like, you would trust your doctor. Like I remember when I used to get birth control, they'd just be like, oh, I would just recommend this one. And I would never ask like, well, what are the other options? Why? What would this affect? And then when you finally come back and you're like, this isn't working, they'll be like, okay, let's try this one. And it's like, I'm not sure they are even incentivized to give you the proper information of like which one you should be taking. Totally.
So yeah, it's such a, the more you dig, I think, through women's health, you're like, wow, there's a lot of things we need to fix.
Totally. And I think that's what's also cool about the Lioness is that you're kind of taking this idea of like lab coat, white coat research into the woman's bedroom, you know, and you're kind of breaking the barriers of what it means to even conduct research, what it looks like, who's participating, and just who's writing these articles and like publishing. So I think it's really commendable, everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's like the hope is that we continue to partner with, you know, there are such incredible researchers and doctors in this space. And so it's us not being like, hey, we're going to, you know, do our own thing. It's constantly collaborating with them to make sure like that, you know, we can get these studies out and we can use our, like, for us, like use our platform to be like, hey, here are these really cool researchers. They need more participants and doing all those things, which is like really, really fun. And I'm also like, I want to participate on these studies. Like, I want to do it for science and all of that.
And you're helping women get pleasure. So like, that's like the main thing.
Yes, that's my goal in life.
Awesome. And so the last question I ask everybody is, how have you faked it?
Ooh, faked it just in general?
Whatever, it can be fake it till you make it. It could be faking orgasms, whatever, however you want to define it.
Okay. Oh, how spicy do I want to go with this?
Go spicy. This podcast is spicy. This is an explicit episode.
Ooh, I would say like, I would say for faking it, like when we started this company, I think a lot of times the lens was on us that like we were hypersexual people and like, oh, like you must have a lot of sex. You must have a lot of partners. Like you must be super kinky to be in this space. Right. And I would say over the years, I've gotten very curious about the world of sex and as a whole, because there's so many ways people experience pleasure.
Totally.
But I remember at the very beginning, it made me actually feel, it was like imposter syndrome already that I was an entrepreneur. Like it's scary journey. But then I was also like, oh, I feel like I have to be like really sexually just savvy. And so I remember
go to
like
all the orgies in San Francisco. Like,
and so people would be like, oh, what have you been doing? And so like, I remember when I would be with like intimate with a partner, I would feel like, oh, maybe I'm like, I don't know, like I get this pressure. Yeah, too vanilla. Or like, and so I would start faking things or like things that I liked or didn't like. And I've learned over the years of like, okay, I'm not doing that. Like I already have the things that I like and don't like, willing to explore. I'm super open to having the conversation now. But I remember in the beginning, I was so like, I felt like I had to play a part of being like super sexual or like whatever, that I was like faking it. I was like faking orgasm still that day. And I was like, how can I be building a company and being able, like doing this? And I think that was like the first 2 years of me like figuring my footing out as a founder. And like now I'm like, I can't be bothered if I'm not orgasming. I'm not orgasming. It's fine.
Right. Totally.
But yeah, so now I've become, I think, different and like more open and like open to have the conversations as well. But yeah, I was like faking it still.
I'm glad that you're not doing that anymore.
I know. No, it's not worth anyone's time to be faking unless it's like there's like research actually. There's like a faking O scale, like orgasm scale.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons people fake orgasms is because it enhances the moment, like heightens the sexual tension moment because it just makes it hotter. So I'm actually all for that. Like if it's like kind of add adds to the element, like if that's like good for you, like totally fine. If you're doing it because you're going to feel bad for the other person or you feel pressured, then I'm like, it's not worth it.
Yeah, but, no, I get that. It's kind of like just like being like, like when you don't need to. It's not like natural, but you're just doing
like
it.
adding to it, you know? Yeah. So I'm all for that. I think that's a great way to like, I don't know, enhance the moment if that makes sense for you.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes. Thanks for having me.